Okay, hello everybody and welcome to Travel Days 2020 presented by Italian National Tourist Board. I'm Huntley Mitchell, editor of Travel Weekly, and before we kick off proceedings, I want to let you know about a few house rules. You should be able to see the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen. Feel free to use this to communicate with your fellow attendees during each session. However, our moderator will boot out anyone who uses it inappropriately. So one strike and you are out. We'll also be taking a few questions at the end of the session, if there are any. So if there is something you want to answer, please submit your question via the Q&A function, which is also located on the right-hand side of your screen. If you do decide to share anything Travel Days related on social media, make sure you include the hashtags Travel Days and Travel Days 2020. We'll also be sharing a feedback poll at the end of the session. Please let us know what you think before you leave. Now, I'd like to introduce our two speakers for the session. Renee is the Director of Commercial at New Zealand. Renee, how do you pronounce your last name, Renee? Just so I don't. Demonchi. Very good. And he's the Director of Commercial at Tourism New Zealand, and joining him is Catherine Robertson, who's Air New Zealand Manager for Australia. Welcome to you both, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, obviously, with certain parts of Australia welcoming Kiwi travellers once again, I guess it'll only be heading back across the ditch. So this session will explore how Tourism New Zealand and New Zealand are readying themselves for the eventual tourism rebound, and what travel agents can be doing now to make the most of the upcoming trans-Tasman opportunity. So I've got plenty of questions to ask. We'll just get straight into them, shall we?
Great.
Okay.
Excellent.
First question. This year has been tumultuous for the travel industry. I'll start with you, Renee. How Tourism New Zealand overcome the challenges that it's faced?
Yeah, thanks, Huntley. I mean, it's certainly, I don't need to say it, it's been oversaid in terms of unprecedented times and pivoting and agility and all of those things. Obviously, this year has been brutal in terms of the impact on the sector. What we've done is focused on a number of key areas. One is we have started work also on promoting domestic tourism within New Zealand. And at the same time, we have been very cognizant of going, we need to keep the brand also alive for future visitation to New Zealand. So we have continued to focus on how do we build desire for New Zealand for future visitation. We've continued promoting New Zealand in our major markets. And at the same time, and then the third piece has probably been around how do we make sure that we continue to engage the ever important travel trade channel in terms of being able to convert, when the borders do open, we need to have our travel partners be ready to be able to convert that business when it comes. But it's certainly been, as you can imagine, and for everybody in the sector, a roller coaster of time. In fact, we established our domestic tourism team during our initial lockdown back in April and developed our first piece of domestic campaign work whilst the country was still at what we call level 3, which is a fairly restricted level of movement.
Right, okay. And Catherine, from an aviation perspective, how has Air New Zealand overcome the challenges that it's faced? Obviously, it's got a pretty fresh CEO now that's been guiding the way. So if you could give us a bit of detail about how it's been navigating its way through the pandemic.
Yeah, sorry, that was it cut out a bit for me, but I think I grasped the main part of the question. So, yeah, I mean, likewise, it's been a challenging year for the aviation industry, and I guess one thing that stood out for us here at Air New Zealand across the pandemic is being agile and sort of navigating the unknown has challenged us, but also it's provided new ways of thinking, and hopefully these will continue to evolve in the future. we're lucky that we've had the domestic operation up and running in New Zealand. So obviously that's given us key learnings for about the wider recovery when that comes. But I think what's been really positive, just to back up Renee's comment, is that pent-up demand for travel. So, you know, we know the Tasman bubble could be the first international destination for Australians. And we already know that there's up to 11 million Aussies that like to travel across to New Zealand. So I think it's given us confidence that when the bubble does finally happen, that we do think there'll be that pent-up demand for people to go to New Zealand. It's also been interesting as well, I guess, in crisis mode that we've become a lot quicker and faster at operationalising changes. So standing up charter flights to new destinations would usually take months of preparation, and we have to do things like that in a matter of weeks. And likewise, digital work, things like the credit solution, which will be very close to a lot of the travel agents' hearts. We didn't have a solution before all this happened because we'd never come across something like this before. So being able to kind of start from scratch with a digital solution to be able to facilitate that credit situation has given us that new rhythm and that new pace, which is something we'd like to see continuing going forward. So real prioritization in those digital areas, innovation and all the customer experience and service side, because a key thing really has been ensuring that customers feel safe to fly.
Yeah, sure. And just on Air New Zealand's recovery, have you got a timeline in mind on how long it's going to get back to a full recovery from what you were pre-pandemic?
It's hard really, right, because we still don't know enough about all the border openings. So it's fair to say that we've got lots of different scenarios that we're working on behind the scenes. But I think, you know, already some of those scenarios are not working to the timelines that we expected. So, I mean, the key thing really is to get the Tasman and the PI flying up again. We appreciate on-call destinations will take longer. It may be even when there's a vaccine readily available. But we've certainly worked on our future strategy so that we're in good shape for when those borders open and we can jump at the opportunities again.
Yeah, okay. And Renee, from a destination perspective, how long do you think it's going to take for the tourism industry there and just the local economy in general in terms of recovery?
Well, the challenge there is, I think, you know, as for everybody, this came, you know, it came so rapid, right? So the response and the rapid impact. The slight silver lining we had on that versus our Northern Hemisphere destinations is we had the bulk of our summer. So when the real impact started coming in New Zealand was kind of in February, March. That is towards the tail end of our peak season. Look, the impact is obviously going to be substantial. So in kind of round numbers, the tourism sector in New Zealand is around about 50% domestic and around about 50% international, with Australia clearly being our most important international market within that. So, you know, we are very keen, obviously, on the bubble. So I think what you will see is actually domestically, it's quite interesting that the response in New Zealand over the last 6 or 7 months, the bounce back, if we can call it that, has probably been a bit faster than people had anticipated. If I talk to tourism operators, and I don't want to speak for Air New Zealand, but I think even the domestic Air New Zealand team was surprised that during our school holidays, some of those, you know, this pace at which New Zealanders got out and travelled in their own country. Then it gives you some positive figures. So if I look at the winter domestically was up 7%. Versus last year, but what is hidden in that number is that overall winter was down almost 20%. So the point being that whilst domestic is up, it's not big enough to fill the hole, and I think that hole is going to become more challenging as we now are going into our peak season. So how quickly it recovers really depends on how quickly we can start getting visitors back into the country. And Australia is a very significant part of that, not just for the visitor economy, but for the border. You know, there's a lot of VFR, there's lots of friends and family across both sides of the Tasman, and obviously a pretty significant business. So that will certainly be crucial to the recovery. And as quickly as those borders can start to open up, we'll see that recovery come back. And probably just one last final point on that, Huntley. What we have seen in our talking to our domestic operators here is a very varied impact of this crisis. So you've seen some businesses that are still effectively closed, that were entirely internationally focused and probably long haul focused, who have been unable to kind of reinvent themselves for something new. And at the other end, we have operators that have actually quite successfully been able to adapt to a domestic only market, which is the current environment.
Okay. And in terms of the activity that you've got planned, Renee, for this recovery process, can you share some details around that, some industry activity?
Yeah, so look, our big focus, as I said at the start, is going, how do we keep people thinking and dreaming about New Zealand? So we have been developing a series of programs. Actually, when it comes to the trans-Tasman bubble, what we did is there was a period of time, if you remember, that we thought that was all of a sudden going to happen in July. So there was a little bit of panic, to say the least, here in terms of going, how do we make sure we have all of our content ready should that happen? So actually we had our full plan ready from both a paid and earned perspective, how we would start to promote that. And we were ready to go for July, and we continue to refine that program and adjusting dates and media buys as we go. And then also when we think about long haul markets, our approach is very much, we are taking a kind of a realistic but optimistic view of border openings. What that means is we will ensure that we have our content ready for the major markets as and when they open, and we'll make sure that we're ready in advance of those opening. But fair to say, obviously Australia is likely. I mean, I don't know any more than anybody else around those timings. Likely to be first, but fair to say that we will also respond to future border openings and which markets they'll be. We will be agile in our approach to promote New Zealand from those destinations.
Okay, and Catherine, from Air New Zealand's perspective, how are you going to drive the airline forward in terms of activity and I guess get some bums on seats for when this two-way travel bubble commences?
Yeah, and pretty similar to Renee. I mean, obviously we work closely with Tourism New Zealand here in Australia as well. So we've had lots of iterations of plans, as you can imagine, as the timeline has kind of changed over the last few months. So pretty similar. We've got as far as we can in terms of planning activity, with the exception of putting dates around it, i.e. booking any media or confirming anything concrete. So we've got some robust trade and consumer plans underway. And it's just a matter of once we know when the actual date will be, then we can put all of that stuff live. So we're ready to re-engage with customers, with the trade. We've thought of all our audiences. We've thought of new audiences. Maybe this has changed. We definitely think VFR will be obviously the first audience that will come back and have that pent-up demand. But maybe COVID's changed in terms of exploring some different audiences as well. So some of it will be learning as we come back as well, just to make sure that all our old tried and tested ways are still the way to go. We've got lots of work going on with partners, whether that be trade partners, the airports, the regional tourist boards in New Zealand. Everybody's in it together to when we finally get the news that we can do that together here in Australia. Over in New Zealand, of course, we have been running a lot of domestic campaigns. So we have been going out with both retail leisure campaigns and also the SME corporate campaign as well, just to get the message across that, that it's good again to travel domestically. And we've seen some really good results. Our domestic network's operating at about 75% of last year's or pre-COVID capacity. And it's good to see that corporate market is starting to come back as strongly as the leisure market. So it's been at around that 75 to 80% of pre-COVID on the corporate side as well, which has been really impressive. So in Australia, we're trying to look at that, what's been happening domestically, and try and apply some of that to what we think will happen when the Tasman opens up as well.
Yeah, sure. And just on, I guess, getting back into market and trying to drive, more passengers, sitting on the planes and getting over to New Zealand and vice versa, and also, just increasing your revenue and stuff. Obviously, you need to keep in mind that you want to build sustainably. And I guess that's the theme of this conference, is recovering and rebuilding a sustainable future. So I noticed that Air New Zealand did release its sustainability report as well recently. So how has COVID-19 affected Air New Zealand in reaching its sustainability goals that it had in mind? And is the airline still on track to achieve those goals?
Yeah, I mean, COVID certainly changed a lot of that, as you can imagine, because obviously we're not kind of flying the same as what we were pre this. But absolutely, sustainability is still key for us going forward. And we made a lot of those commitments around the sustainability goals that we needed to achieve by 2050. And we're still, really keen on achieving those as we go forward. I think what's also been interesting is that we've seen an increase in the percentage of customers who voluntarily offset their carbon emissions. So that's quite interesting through this pandemic that's actually increased. And, here in Australia, for example, you can do it on our Australian website, and that increased to about 6% from about 4% the previous year. So I guess that's a sign that people are still definitely, focused on this side. So very much our sustainability framework commitment still stands. We're still targeting emission reductions and carbon reduction for the future of aviation. That's obviously critical for the future and for tourism. And I guess collaboration as well with our partners is as important as ever if we're going to achieve those. So yes, it's all about stimulating domestic tourism at the moment, but it's also around working with those communities within New Zealand. So we're still progressing our partnership, for example, with the Department of Conservation in New Zealand, and again, working hand in hand with Tourism New Zealand around some of those goals as well. So yeah, it's still very much on our agenda and will be a key strategic focus going forward.
Sure. And Renee, from Tourism New Zealand's perspective, is a focus of the destination to make sure that when travellers are coming back to visit New Zealand, that they tread with a light foot, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tourism New Zealand's strategy is we always talk about how do we enrich New Zealand, which means which enrichment, actually the definition of that is kind of giving back more than it takes. It's versus sustainability, which is actually about kind of standing still. So we always talk about the challenge for us and the opportunity for us now, given the current state we're in, is going, how do we create a tourism system that's world leading, one that truly gives back more than it takes? And when we talk about enriching, we think about that through the kind of lens of kind of four well-beings, if you like, which is cultural, economic, environmental, and social. So it's a broader kind of opportunity, I think, beyond just environmental. And look, and the good thing is that, as you all well know, and the people on the call, I'm sure that many operators are already doing this, right? So the discussion around carbon has been around for a while, and certainly I think through this crisis is you will see operators accelerate their kind of environmental credentials and how we can kind of build back better from that perspective. We also, Catherine mentioned DOC, we're also partnering as well with the DOC as the Department of Conservation around the kind of regeneration project. There's an industry body here, Tourism Industry Aotearoa, TIA, which has a sustainability framework. We're working with that. And then we have Qualmark, which is our kind of assessment arm of Tourism New Zealand, which also has a big increased focus on sustainability. So I think what we see now is lots of operators are really thinking about how can I kind of reinvent myself across some of these sustainability opportunities and kind of come back better off the back of it.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of the support that Tourism New Zealand has been offering the trade throughout this pandemic and will continue to support, can you just give a few more details around what you've been up to there?
Yeah, so look, our real focus, as I said at the start, is about how do we continue to promote to consumers, so start getting people to dream about New Zealand. For us, that is crucially important because when you go beyond Australia, we represent anywhere between 0.25 and 0.3% of outbound travel in those markets. So we have to continue to work really hard to stay top of mind, and equally important in that is the importance of the trade, making sure that the destination stays top of mind. So the last kind of 4 or 5 months, we've developed a framework and support partnership trade training for agents who've been doing this around the globe as well as in Australia. We've developed a domestic resource hub, which contains a whole lot of kind of online training programs, suggested itineraries, and kind of refreshed toolkits for regional information. And one thing is, we're very clear in terms of that two-pronged approach, keeping the brand alive for consumers, but equally, how do we ensure that we support industry with webinar trainings, travel agent-specific Facebook groups, easy access to marketing materials, and making sure that that is all kind of kept front of mind, so that when we do start to see the opportunity to convert, we want to make sure that we've given the tools to those who do the conversion.
Okay, and now to Air New Zealand, Catherine, how has the airline been supporting the trade, and how does it plan to continue supporting the trade and travel agents?
Yeah, I mean, I think the travel and tourism sector has displayed an incredible level of resilience, and it probably speaks to the type of industry that we are with our partners and agents continuing to provide such that high level of care and compassion to support customers over this time. And we know it's not been easy, right? There's so much information out there. There's been, every airline's had different policies that they've had to understand and get their heads around. And so we know there's been a lot of complexity. And I think the key thing for us has been around communication. So where we can, just trying to communicate and even over communicate to our trade partners, just to make them aware of what's going on at Air New Zealand, what's operating, what's not operating, what's happening with refunds, credits. So we've worked really closely with all the trade across trade and TMCs, just to basically give them as much information as they need. The other thing really is it's changing constantly. So it's not like you can give some communication and feel that job's done. With all the borders opening and closing, the different COVID testing required for different countries. Even this week, all the Chinese government has changed their restrictions again in terms of COVID testing. So it's kind of that constant communication around giving them as much information so they can help their customers as best as possible. And I think that will continue going forward. So I think going forward, those channels will be crucial. We know many agents are working remotely or home-based. So we need to really think about and innovate how we can work better going forward with getting that right information to the right people in the right way as well, so that they can continue to be empowered and give them access to further support that they need from us. So that's kind of at that agent level. Sort of from an overarching level, we're also looking at things like simpler deals, reducing complexity, and making it easier basically to do business. The trade is still an absolute key channel for Air New Zealand, and we need the support of the trade. So we need to work hand in hand to make sure that we're both achieving what we need to in the short and long term.
Sure. And you were talking just before, you mentioned cancellations and refunds. Obviously, that's something that's taking up a lot of time for both the airlines, but also the agents, who are booking these holidays. Do you think the cancellation policies of airlines will continue to be flexible, forever, or from here on, or will they start to, as we get back to normalcy, I guess revert back to the way they were?
Yeah, I mean, I think now to give people confidence to book, you've got to provide that flexibility. And I think, we've seen it with all airlines, travel companies. We're having to change the way that we normally do things, because we appreciate that people are concerned, and rightly so, that they don't want to make the commitment to book something and then find that things change again. So yeah, we've also changed a lot of the flexibility in our pricing, and at the moment that's out until March. That's not to say that will always be March. I mean, we will review and assess as we know more about border openings and as we know more. And if we need to, then of course we'll apply some more of that flexibility. The credit solution took a while to go live because, as I said, we had to build it from scratch, to be perfectly honest. But we're pleased to say now that both our direct and our indirect credit solution has gone live, and it's working well. We're seeing people redeem some of those credits, not quite to the extent they will once the borders are open, but some of them are using them to redeem either for domestic trips or using it for flights in the future. So that's worked well, but there was a lot of complexity to get that out the door. So hopefully now we're sort of in a better space with all that refund credit. It just kind of all hit at once, to be honest. So there was a lot of work to be done to work our way through that. But yeah, I think that flexibility thing is really important, and will be something that we'll see continue.
Sure. And just quickly, while we're on the topic of customer experience, are there any other ways that Air New Zealand has changed its customer experience since COVID-19 hit? And I guess what are customers demanding from Air New Zealand now that they weren't before, and how is it meeting those demands?
So I think the key thing is that people want to feel safe. So there's lots of noise around, can you catch COVID in flight? There's been lots of equally reports back explaining that the air filtering on aircraft is to a hospital grade. So there's been no proven cases of any COVID transmission in flight. So that's one of the key things that we need to make sure that people are aware of. But also, using the protective equipment. So what we've done with a lot of our marketing work is actually shown crew wearing the protective masks or the gloves, just so that people can manage expectations, just so when they get on board, they might look a little bit different to what they're used to. So we've got a lot more use of hand sanitizers, face masks, all that is kind of readily available on board. We've kind of dipped in and out of different changes across New Zealand depending on the alert levels. So for example, when Auckland went back into a higher alert level, we had to look at things like lounges again, and the product offering in the lounges changed from being a buffet style food offering to pre-packaged snacks, so that people weren't kind of all kind of diving in and helping themselves to stuff. And also social distancing. So you'll see that, for example, with our kiosks at airports, we perhaps will have every other one switched off so that people have got more space. And likewise, boarding processes, just doing it in kind of groups, so that there's more social distancing as people are all in those confined spaces. For a while, we had the middle seat free domestically, but luckily that's now come off, and we can go back to filling full capacity on those flights. Okay,
and I guess while we're on that topic of safety for travellers and also their changing expectations, Renee, how is Tourism New Zealand addressing that, and I guess helping operators and accommodation providers and the like addressing that issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a hot topic and probably getting hotter by the day. So we continue to do our research domestically and internationally amongst what we call active considerers or potential visitors that are interested in coming to New Zealand. And what we've seen in the last 6 months, where kind of health and safety was kind of number 7 or number 8 on the consideration of travel to a destination, it's now number 1 for most of those groups, which clearly indicate, and you've got to dig under that a little bit more, right? It's not just health and safety, but it's insurance, hospital, hospital facilities, the full gambit. But certainly there is a big implication for the tourism businesses here in terms of the expectation of visitors to go, I need to know whether I can do contactless payment, contactless check-in, all of those things. What are the track and trace facilities available and all of that? What we are doing, again, through our kind of quality arm, Qualmark, is working with operators in terms of what are those expectations from the different groups of audiences, right? To make sure that, we talked for a while about the post-COVID world. I think we're all now getting used to the reality that there's a kind of an in-COVID world that we're going to need to operate with at a certain time, and the expectations of the visitor will be quite different than they were before. And some of that is not just medical solutions and insurance solutions. A lot of it is also technology solutions. So the contactless payment I talked about earlier, that's going to be crucially important. So if there's an operator we just did a series of roadshows around the country in the last couple of weeks in New Zealand, and that's been one of the key points, is make sure that you have kind of all contactless payment opportunities available. So that's a small example of going, that is just going to be the norm of expectation of future visits.
Yeah, okay. I guess this next question, it's been one that everyone continues to ask, and I think you know what I'm going to ask. You both have touched on it in your previous answers, but there's obviously been much discussion on a travel bubble, and it's going one way. I guess the question remains is, when is it going to start going the other way? I've read that reports that Jacinda Ardern could be announcing something as early as Friday when she swears in her cabinet. So I don't know how true that is, but Renee, I'll start with you. When do you think this is actually going to happen?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you, Huntley, that I had more information than anybody else, but I don't. What I can tell you is that I think it's very clear, both from a tourism perspective, but from a broader export perspective, Australia and New Zealand is crucially important, right? Australia is crucially important to us. I personally think it's a good positive sign that there is a bit of one-way travel. I don't think there's an enormous amount of traffic traveling one way, but it's good to see the door start to open a little bit. Look, we have been kind of moving our planning as everybody else. There was a moment that we thought it was July, then it was October, and of course we've had the kind of, in both our countries, the flare-ups between then and now. We are now planning for a Q1 in 2021. I don't know, but as I said at the start, we have our plans ready, and we can push play in a matter of days on a lot of that content. Because I think that's going to be one of the challenges. There is the possibility that if an announcement is made, it may be, there may not be a lot of notice. That's certainly what we've learned from a domestic travel perspective. Changes happen quite rapidly. So I wish I could give you more than that. All I can say is that we will continue to focus on making sure we're ready for when it does happen, and it will be crucially important for the sector.
Okay, I believe you. Catherine, I'll throw the question over to you. Obviously, Air New Zealand's travelling one way. When do you think it's going to be going the other way?
Yeah, well, everyone got very excited on your interview with Darren Rudd earlier in the week, because he very confidently said it will be before Christmas. So I've been inundated since Darren's interview saying, is he right? Has he got any information that you've not got? So I think everybody got very excited. Even my team here listened to that and thought there was something I wasn't telling them. But no, exactly the same. We just don't know. I mean, we know the governments are talking, so that's good. The one-way bubble has definitely been a step in the right direction. And we have seen pretty okay loads, actually. It's obviously all one-way traffic coming from New Zealand into New South Wales, and some of them now making their way into other states. So, I mean, that's been good. More from a point of view of we had 2 weeks notice of that. So there was a lot of processes to get set up. So one thing that has helped with is when the full bubble does happen, we're very clear now on protocols, processes. We've worked really closely with the airports to understand their safe travel zones. So we've got what we call green zones and red zones for those flights that are just coming from New Zealand versus those that are coming from other places and transiting. Yeah, and also the domestic state borders here. The news today, obviously, of New South Wales opening to Victoria, that can only all help, right? So as we were always of the view that Australia needed to open its domestic borders first, and then once that was happening, then I think New Zealand would be next on the list. So it's good. It's a good step in the right direction. And like Renee, when that news comes out, then we are ready. We're ready to go. We've done a lot of planning, a lot of thinking, and yeah, we're just ready to flip the switch once we know. But likewise, we've got lots of different scenarios of when it could be. Could it be pre-Christmas, post-Christmas? But pretty similar. We're probably realistically looking at Q1 next year.
Okay. And I mean, we've covered so much already, which is great. But we've got a couple of questions that have come in from attendees. So I'm going to ask those if that's all right. Catherine, this one's for you, and it's from Andrew Gillard. Do you think that airlines would see more bookings if they had a policy of confidence in issuing a ticket? So not credits or free change policy, but 100% refund if it becomes impossible to travel down the track. He's saying that his clients are very reluctant to book with the possibility of their money being tied up?
Yeah, I think this goes back to that flexibility question that you asked, doesn't it, Huntley, around, what confidence can customers have going forward, that if they do book something, particularly an expensive trip, what kind of flexibility have they got? So, I mean, we're kind of reviewing all our fare products, to be honest, so particularly on the Tasman Ready for when we do come back. I still think you'll need a range of fares to offer. I don't think everything can become fully refundable, fully flexible. I still think you need that range, but I do think we'll be looking at scenarios perhaps where you can pay a little bit more for a little bit more flexibility, or you can pay a bit more to get 100% refundable package. So there's just different ways that we're looking at it. I think it's changed the whole way that airline pricing will be going forward, and then take it another level when you're working with the trade and your packaging as well. Then obviously that's going to be of a similar situation where you're going to have to have a look at that flexibility within the package as well. So yeah, I mean, I think. To answer his question, yes, I think we will have to look at things differently, and what reassurances and confidence we can give customers when they're booking something in case things change in the future.
Sure. Okay. This is a question, I think, for both of you. This one's from Jackie. How soon after the Australia-New Zealand bubble happens that we see Fiji perhaps being included within that bubble too? Renee, I might start with you on that one.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I think the conversations have been going, I know in the early stages of talking about the bubble, it was kind of included in that discussion. To be honest, I don't know whether that's still the case, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is included quite quickly, because the reliance of Fiji on both of our countries, I think, and the friends and family connection, same discussion. So my expectation would be that would follow quite closely, if not part of it.
Okay, Catherine, your thoughts on that question from Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, the Pacific Islands in general was certainly in that group close after Tasman that we're looking at. I think probably ahead of Fiji for Air New Zealand was probably Cook Islands, to be honest. So you may have seen in the media that pre that little mini wave that they had in New Zealand in August, Cook Islands was very close to kind of happening. So there was quite a lot of media speculation around that. And of course, that all got paused again when Auckland went back down the alert levels. So yeah, I mean, I think Cook Islands, Fiji, that kind of PI bubble I think will be pretty soon after the Tasman, maybe even before. If the Australia-New Zealand thing doesn't go as planned, then maybe some of those islands will come back first. But it's all kind of, as Renee said, in the same talk and the same bubble talk that has been going on.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I've got a question here from Harry. What are your top tips for other countries that are rumoured to be considering bubbles based on the New Zealand experience? I might start again, Renee, with you on that one.
Top tips? Oh, that's a hard one, considering we haven't actually even opened our bubble yet. But I think one is kind of how each country can manage fundamentally kind of track and trace, right? I think what we're going to have to move to is this environment where countries can quickly respond, and how are you going to have the ability to track and trace both your domestic audience as well as visitors. I think that's going to be a crucial part. And the other interesting thing I think that probably countries need to think about, which I'm sure both of our governments are talking about, is also the consequence of opening a bubble means that if you then open to other nations, that becomes kind of a double bubble, if you like. We need to take into consideration the air routes that are already open if others are going to open up as well. But I think what seems to be I think the key challenge for countries or opportunity is kind of that track and trace ability to be able to respond quickly if there are flare-ups.
Okay, and Catherine, on that question, do you have any advice, perhaps from an airline perspective, on working with the destination that you're in terms of trying to come up with some bubble solutions for other airlines that are in this situation?
It's complex. I mean, when we did the halfway bubble, it was a bit of an eye-opener for me, just the complexity that goes into even that. So the key thing was quite interesting that even New Zealand and Australia, just the different government legislations they've got, dealing with Ministry of Health, Border Force, infrastructure, all the different government bodies, if you like, across both sides of the Tasman, are not aligned in terms of their policies and stuff. So I think it's quite complex, and to get that one-way bubble going of bringing Kiwis into New South Wales, there was a lot of work, to get into that, which things that I hadn't thought of, so it was quite fascinating in terms of the breadth of stuff you had to go through, even not just around the passengers and them self-declaring that they'd not been in a hotspot 14 days prior, the testing was needed, but then even our crew, because our crew obviously are based in New Zealand, as opposed to Qantas crew that are based here, so even that was different. So I think don't underestimate the time I guess it would take to get some of these policies done, and that's Australia and New Zealand. So imagine then if you're dealing with China, like they've got different legislations again. So this week with their latest announcement now about needing a blood test before you actually can travel. They're all coming at it from different ways with different policies, and the complexities around that it creates don't take days to work out. It's going to be continuing to, I guess, see those differences in our countries react to that and how we can deal with it.
Yeah, okay. We've got another question here. This one's for Catherine from Orley. Do you have any statistics yet of New Zealand passengers coming back after visiting Australia?
A lot of the travel that we've had has been one-way travel, to be perfectly honest, because obviously if they return to New Zealand, they've still got to undergo the quarantine and the which is a paid-for quarantine, obviously, for 2 weeks. So a lot of what we saw or what have been seeing is more one-way traffic, which is either, I guess, compassionate reasons, visiting friends and relatives and you're here for longer, or maybe people that were stuck in the wrong places because of the capacity caps that had been put in place on all flights into Australia. So, we were capped at probably 30 to 35 on most incoming flights. So that was restricting the flow of people that could come in. They have been quite reasonable loads. We've had wide-body aircraft on some of those green flights, as we're calling them. And I've been surprised. I thought there'd been an initial flurry on that first week of people that had pushed back their travel to avoid the quarantine. And then perhaps it would drop off. But, we're now week 3 of the one-way travel bubble, and the loads are still really encouraging. So obviously more, this way for people coming on that one-way travel. But yeah, I haven't got the stat, to be honest, on how many of those have returned. But I would, from what we've seen, the majority have been one-way bookings.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. I'm going to get in a question myself, I think, before we answer another one from our attendees. One thing I want to know from both of you, what lessons have you learned as a leader throughout the pandemic? Renee, I might just start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think it's funny. One of these, we have these kind of strategy sessions going through as you prepare normally for a year, and it's fair to say that we've never done a scenario planning which says the borders are closed and you now have no international business. I think our learning is a couple of things. One is respond quickly and communicate quickly with industry, certainly when it comes to being a tourism board. So being well connected with operators both onshore and offshore in terms of sharing as much information as you have, and even if we don't have the answers, sharing that. So that's one, is I think connecting well to it. And then I think it is very quickly going to, where are the areas that we can kind of intervene and help, right? This is a health crisis which is being managed by the Ministry of Health and senior government officials. Our role is going, actually, how and where can we start to help? So our example of that is going very quickly during the lockdown, responding and creating a domestic marketing team developing our domestic content and encouraging Kiwis to get out and do something new in New Zealand. But equally going, how do we, what is the campaign work we should be doing for future travel? So those are probably my two things, is going, how do you connect quickly and communicate quickly with your stakeholders inside and outside of the country, and then quickly go into the business of going, where and how can we help, and what's our response?
Yeah. Okay. And Catherine, what are some lessons you've learned throughout this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it's been tough. I've had to put majority of my team here actually on stand down. So last April, actually, from the 1st of April, we made the decision that that's what we do, and unfortunately my team's still on stand down until March. So it's been really difficult on the people side of things dealing with that. We've also been through some downsizing. Luckily, from an Australia perspective, it's all been voluntary redundancies as opposed to any forced redundancies. But I think in that, it's been communication. I agree with Renee. Communication's been key, not just externally, but also from an internal perspective. So although we've all been the majority of the time working from home, it's been really important to still connect with all my team. I found quite early on they wanted to hear from me. They wanted to hear what was going on with the organisation, even if there wasn't much going on. They just wanted to still have that connection. So that real humanistic approach, and people just wanted to talk right. I think we've all, sort of had good days, bad days, and I think being there for the team and, just letting people talk about how they're feeling, because they had a lot of decisions to make around whether, we're going to stay with Energy or leave, and we lost some really time there, New Zealanders that I know struggled to get to that decision, but wanted to talk that through. So I think the role that I sit in here, one of my lessons has been to be very patient, to communicate, and to be there for your team. And I think really to show that resilience as well. I know it's a key word that we've all been saying, but I think resilience has been key through all this, that, you might think things have got really bad one day, but oh my God, wait for the next day because there was, something else that was going to happen there. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster, and that agility piece for me is key as well, that we've had to quickly pivot on one decision to something else. So a bit like the speed that Renee was talking about, but it's also that agility as well, that you might have a few different scenarios that you're having to work on, and you're not sure right until the last minute which scenario you might be dealing with. So to summarise, my key things would be resilience, agility, and communication.
Okay, all great lessons, and hopefully people can use those lessons that both of you have learnt to apply in terms of their recovery of their own businesses. I've got one more question here from the audience, and this one I think is an Air New Zealand one. It's from Martin. Are there plans to reopen a South America route post-pandemic from Air New Zealand's perspective? Catherine?
Unfortunately not, no. So we did announce that our Buenos Aires route was being suspended sort of at the start of COVID, but to be fair, that was kind of a pre-COVID decision. So we made a few network changes. It was probably accelerated because of COVID, but we made a few network changes. So there was the Buenos Aires one along with the London to LA route as well. So yeah, unfortunately that won't be on our future network plan as we come out of COVID.
Okay, no worries. Thanks for that question, Martin. Well, look, I think we've covered a great deal. I'm going to finish with one last question. Who's going to win between the All Blacks and the Wallabies this weekend?
I thought we were going to. I think it's great that you brought up the rugby. I intentionally didn't bring up the rugby, but maybe the Australians will come for this one. But I certainly enjoyed the last two games more than the first game.
I'm sure you did. And Catherine, I know you work for a Kiwi airline, but you're based in Australia. Who are you leaning towards?
and I'm British, so I can, you know, say the way. Yeah, with my with my kind of Air New Zealand hat on, obviously being the main sponsor of the All Blacks, I guess I'm tuned to say the All Blacks, of course. I was at the game on Saturday. In fact, I took my boys to their first rugby match, so they saw a first win. And my husband's a Kiwi, so I guess they are little All Blacks fans. So if I'm remaining true to my to that, I would say the All Blacks. Sorry, Australia.
That's okay. Let's hope that we can give you a bit more of a challenge this weekend.
Sorry, I think the line is frozen a bit at my end, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay. We've got you back here. I can hear you fine, Renee. Well, that's really all we've got time for. We could keep talking all afternoon, but I know both of you have got lots of things to get on with. So I want to thank you both for taking the time out of your busy schedule to update the Travel Days audience on what Tourism New Zealand and Air New Zealand are doing to recover and evolve throughout the pandemic, and hopefully we'll have Aussies heading across the ditch in the very near future.
We look forward to welcoming you with open arms when you come across the ditch.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
No problem. And thanks to everyone who tuned in today. We hope you gained some useful knowledge and advice that you can apply to your own business recovery. But for now, it's bye from Travel Days. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Huntley. Bye-bye.